This is Common Sense Radio. Straightforward and no excuses.
All right. Come on now.
This is the Steve Gruber Show.
Call me crazy.
Oh, yeah.
What I said was perfectly right and spot on accurate.
Boy's got a mouth like a cannon, always shooting it all.
Stop. Yeah, stop. I mean, you're way off script.
Got it in me. Gonna quit until it all comes out.
Hey, boy.
Been a long education.
Yeah, you know, it's not cynical. It's common sense.
Pay attention to me when I'm talking to you.
I'm gonna rock the nation. Rock the nation.
Genuine, accountable, and raw. Here is Steve Gruber.
And welcome to it, my friends. It's the Steve Gruber Show on a Wednesday. Love to get you involved. This hour brought to you in part by Mesa. Good health, good business, and great schools. That's Mesa bringing you the second hour of the Steve Gruber Show in part. Glad to have them on board. Glad to have you on board as well. We hear a lot about income inequality. Income inequality is the battle cry for Hillary and Joe Biden, and especially Bernie, who, whose campaign slogan, if you can't solve it with economic know-how, you can just all solve it with magic. Bernie Sanders' approach is pixie dust and magic. Everything's free all the time, and Bernie rides in on his unicorn, spreading rainbows and love. Well, hey, at least he's in a good mood, I have an idea for you. Maybe there are some relationships between poverty and the family. Maybe there's some relationships between poverty and the cycle of poverty and dependence on government programs and the structure of our families. Families that have been under attack from the liberal agenda my entire life. My entire life. Liberal agendas have attacked the structure of the American family. And if you don't believe me, we can get into that some other day. But here's something for you to consider. In part from the Heritage Foundation. In 2014, 40.6% of all children in the United States were born to unmarried mothers, single moms, producing nearly 41% of all children in the U.S. 72% of black kids born to single moms, 53% of Hispanic kids, single moms, 29% of white kids, single moms. Now, if there's any good news to be found in these discouraging numbers, it is that black non-marital births plateaued in about 1994. They've only gone up about 2 percentage points since then. Optimists might also be able to spy a microscopic decline in the rate for all groups since 2009, but the way we've set up many of these social programs, we encourage moms to stay single moms. We encourage fathers to stay out of the home. We offer more money, more incentives for the family unit to remain broken as opposed to fixing it. There is one other small piece of good news. The full impact of unwed birth is finally being widely recognized. Because this whole conversation had been denied by the left forever. But after a long period of denial, social scientists began to reach a consensus in the late 1990s that the children of single moms were doing worse than the children of married mothers on just about every measure they studied: school achievement, poverty, emotional well-being, drug use, delinquency, and graduation rates. Now, not everyone's been convinced. No, not Hillary and not Bernie and not old Joe. But the disadvantage that attends growing up with a single mother is no longer controversial or hidden. Well, at least to most. Facts generally tend to sway the average person. Experts have also begun to understand that unwed childbearing is deeply entwined with poverty. Even as the government pours money and effort into the war on poverty, families were collapsing among black and Hispanic Americans, and the war on poverty began in earnest about the time I was born. Family decline among whites, while later arriving and not as dramatic, is also bringing more families near poverty. Single-parent families are about 5 times more likely to be poor as married couple families. Well, that's pretty obvious. You may have the potential of 2 breadwinners in the home as opposed to 1. Worse, even if you don't have 2 breadwinners, if dad stays home with the kids or mom stays home with the kids, you're not spending that money on daycare. The worst part about single-parent families, that is, not only are they 5 times more likely to be poor as married couple families, their children are much more likely to remain poor. And not coincidentally, by some measures, the United States, the proud land of opportunity, is now actually less economically mobile than Europe. Still today, non-marital births are even more closely associated with class and education than with race. College-educated women rarely give birth without a husband in tow. The newborn babies of lower-income and less educated women, however, commonly have either no father to greet them or one who is only temporarily in the picture. The class divide in marriage has led to separate and unequal families, which translate to separate and unequal futures for children. You see, the family matters. The family matters, and it doesn't matter what race you are or what religion you are or what your background is. It's pretty simple to understand the family matters. The family unit matters. We need government programs that encourage the family unit and don't destroy it. Even as public awareness grows about the diminished prospects of the children of single parents, as well as about the relationships among unwed, childbearing, poverty, and inequality, what society will do with this new information is by no means clear. Apparently, for Bernie Sanders and Hillary, it's time to tax people more. The conversation about family breakdown remains deeply uncomfortable and even off limits. Don't want to offend anybody. As unmarried childbearing becomes more common all over the Western world, the younger generation will find it difficult to speak truthfully about its effects. Be honest about it. Even as they admit the serious disadvantages of family decline for children, the academic and policy communities offer the ambivalent public an easy and ultimately counterproductive way out of their dilemma. They propose enlarging the already considerable infrastructure of government support for single moms. Make government the husband. Make government the husband. As a political matter, this means labeling those who warn about unintended consequences of this approach as greedy and lacking in compassion. I have lots of compassion. I also know it works. The family works. The pressure to accept and adapt to widespread single motherhood is by increasing the size and cost of government is bound to grow, and it is limitless. You see, because on the left they'll say, let the government be the husband. Let the government step up and solve these problems. How about we let fathers step up? There are not enough fathers participating in the American home today. That's the biggest driver of income inequality. Not a lack of government services, a lack of fathers, a lack of good parenting, a lack of intact nuclear homes. We need more fathers, my friends. Even if you're a divorced father, fathers that participate in their kids' lives create much better children. Being involved really is that important. It's 14 after on a Wednesday. This is the Steve Gruber Show.
Keeping you in touch with Michigan and the world.
Say your prayers, it's a one. Don't forget, my son, to include everyone. I tucked you in, all within. Keep you free.
Here on the program yesterday, we had Dan Bishop from Consumers Energy discussing again the implications and the impact of shuttering 9 coal-fired power plants in Michigan by April, 7 of those owned by Consumers Energy, taking off the grid here in Michigan 1.3 gigabytes of electricity. And Dan Bishop of Consumers saying it will not affect our customers, although at the same time saying that rolling blackouts could become commonplace in Michigan because we don't have enough energy, but it said consumers will be okay. But smaller companies could affect consumers. I was still not crystal clear on that whole thing. And also saying that Consumers has no intention of reversing course on closing these plants. And why should they? The government's telling them they get to have all brand new power plants, all brand new natural gas-fired power plants, for example. And who gets to foot the bill? Well, you and I do. That's the problem. Christine Harbin Hanson from the Americans for Prosperity says Michigan should join states refusing compliance with the EPA's power grab. I agree with that because this all roots back to the EPA's emission standards, which have now been knocked down by the United States Supreme Court, but it seems to be making no difference here. Christine Harbin Hanson, welcome back to the program.
Steve, great to be with you.
It seems that we're going to foot the bill anyway because it seems that the power companies here, well, let's be honest, it's mandated that they get new power plants, brand new equipment, and we get to pay for it.
Right, and there's certain things called guaranteed rate of return that shows that utilities and other power plants will be able to profit from making these government mandate improvements. So yeah, you're exactly right, Steve. These changes always come back to the consumer. Unfortunately, families and businesses living in Michigan will be the ones who have to shoulder these costs.
Yeah, it's confusing because we've also been told, and not to single consumers out, they've been the most forthcoming, without question. They've been the most available to have the conversation. They said for their customers, rates will not rise any more than 4% a year. And again, I find that pretty optimistic considering we've got 9 plants, 7 of which are owned by consumers, coal-fired power plants that are coming off the grid, 1.3 gigawatts, I should say, of electricity coming off in just a few months. And supply and demand indicates to me, and I'm no electrical genius here, but simple supply and demand would indicate to me that rates would have to go up more than 4%, and that if you're taking that much power out of the grid, that we're all vulnerable for these rolling blackouts. But they say I'm wrong. What do you think?
Well, I think that's the right way to look at it. When the basic laws of supply and demand still apply here. We hear a lot of hand waving. We hear a lot of politically charged rhetoric when it comes to special interests at the state level and federal level when it comes to implementing these green energy mandates. But I mean, if you really look at the basics, what these laws are, what the president's Clean Power Plan is going to do is really restrict the supply of affordable and reliable energy that families and businesses can use. And it's also going to pass costs down to consumers. One basic lesson in economics, I think I learned it in Econ 101, is the concept of there's no such thing as a free lunch. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about programs like Obama's carbon rule, when we're talking about things like renewable portfolio standards. Sure, it sounds great to be able to, run our cities on wind power or solar power or other sustainable forces, but the fact of the matter is that these things aren't free, and someone's going to have to pay for it.
Well, the fact of the matter is, Christine, we're not going to run semi-18-wheelers down the highway with windmills on their back. They look like one of those little kid hats with a propeller on top of it, for God's sake. That's not going to happen. We're not going to send freight trains over the Rocky Mountains using solar panels. Sorry, newsflash, isn't going to, it may happen someday. We're 100 years from there. At least. It's nonsense. Again, it's like Bernie Sanders, and I know you don't take political stands, solving problems with pixie dust and rainbows. It just doesn't work that way. But you may not take political stands, but I am funny. Admit it.
What's been really disappointing from our perspective at Americans for Prosperity is the fact that Michigan Governor Snyder just recently announced that he was going to implement this so-called clean power plan. He's essentially ceding a lot of authority to the federal government, saying he's going to rubber stamp this. But meanwhile, his attorney general has highlighted a number of problems with the rule, has joined a lawsuit with other attorneys general that is really digging at some of the legal questions with the rule. So there's a lot to sort out here, and the heart of the matter is state leaders in Michigan should really think twice before implementing this. But unfortunately, the governor has apparently made up his mind that he wants to implement it.
Yeah, not a good choice, not for any of it, to take perfectly good power supply sources and eliminate them from a flawed rule being dictated by unelected officials that is not, this has not passed Congress. This has not been approved by the people that I elected to represent me or voted for. Our constituencies are not being represented in Michigan. It is clearly, you can call it what you want, but it is taxation without representation. If our electric bills go up and we're being stuck with the bill for all sorts of things. Christine, 20 seconds for the last word.
What people should do, people should realize that this is a really harmful rule, and what they should do is they should call on their state leaders and urge them to reject efforts to comply with. And to learn more about this, go to americansforprosperity.org.
Christine Harbin, Hanson, always a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me on, Steve.
Thank you so much. All right, Americans for Prosperity, you can find out more. Michigan should join the states refusing compliance with the EPA's rules that have been put in place by bureaucrats, unelected bureaucrats, telling you and I what we need to pay in running our lives. Is that what we signed up for? No. It's Wednesday morning. Welcome back to the Steve Gruber Show. I appreciate your support. If you'd like to find out more, go to Facebook, The Steve Gruber Show. You'll find postings, musings. SteveGruber.com, you can find the Listen Live button for the Monday through Friday shows. And if you ever miss something, you can go to the podcast, hosted by our good friends at Podbean. That's all at SteveGruber.com there for your convenience and for additional research and so forth. A lot of conversations this year, fueled in part by Donald Trump's focus on illegal aliens coming into the country, the death of Kate Steinle in San Francisco at the hands of an illegal immigrant. A lot of emotion in this conversation, but here's a cold hard fact. The immigrant population in America has hit a record 42.1 million people. It hit it here in the second quarter of 2015. The growth driven in large part by the surge of those coming over the southern border, both legal and illegal. Dr. Stephen Camarata serves as the Director of Research for the Center for Immigration Studies, a Washington, D.C.-based research institute and think tank. Doctor, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
That seems to me like a huge number. We have, 325 million people in America, give or take. 42.1 million seems like a large portion of the population. Is it something that we as Americans should have some concern with, or is it just a fact that the demographics are changing?
Well, I mean, the fact that the demographics are changing. I mean, remember, this represents choice, right? Legal immigration is set by the American people. It's very generous. Over 1 million new permanent legal immigrants each year. That's the so-called green card, as well as 800,000 long-term temporary visitors. And we also have chosen to allow large-scale illegal immigration. So of this 42 million, roughly 11 million might be illegal immigrants. So this represents a choice. It's not, the demographics are changing. Remember, it's a policy decision. It's like taxes, right? You wouldn't want to say, taxes, they're what they are. This is a policy each year, and we have to decide. The Census Bureau projects that under the current system of legal immigration, mainly is how most folks come. There are illegals, of course, but that the share of the population that is foreign-born will, in about 8 years, be higher than it's ever been in American history. It's almost there now. It's getting pretty close, 13.3 million, but it was a little bit higher, about 1%, a little more than 1 percentage point higher back in 1910. So, but we're about there again, and then that's a question: does that make sense? What does it mean for our schools and our healthcare system? Is the level of immigration so high? Is it overwhelming the assimilation and integration of immigrants into our society at a time?
Well, Doctor, there's a difference. You see, the difference in 1910 compared to 2015 is that in 1910, those that immigrated here learned English. They became part of our culture. They became Americans. And today, increasingly, you see people that have no interest in learning English or learning our culture. In fact, they want to impose their culture upon the American way of life, if you will. And so, therefore, it's a very different approach to immigration, whether legal or illegal.
Yeah, I would point out, though, that there are some really fundamental differences as well. Remember, the numbers are enormous. In 1910, there was a few million people, and that's because the overall population was smaller. But once you get to 1 million people, whether that's 10% or 50% of a city's population matters less than it's still 1 million people in an urban area, in there are urban areas like this, and that can create a lot of linguistic isolation and slow language acquisition. Another thing to remember is that in the past, we generally gave the immigrants a more consistent and unambiguous message that they were expected to assimilate. And that didn't just mean learn English, though you're certainly right, that was very important. And it didn't just mean pay your taxes, though that's important too. It meant that you were supposed to come to identify with America and her people. You were supposed to come to see yourself as Americans. But we've had the rise of multiculturalism and grievance-based and political party, political action. We've had identity politics. And these things give a very conflicted message to immigrants.
Yeah, I would say because they look around, it's a society of victimhood. Everybody comes here with their hand out because somehow they've been victimized. You know, it's a load of garbage, and I agree with you. And I agree with Teddy Roosevelt's hyphenated American. A hyphenated American is no American at all, said Teddy Roosevelt in about 1915 after he was president of the United States. And I agree with that point of view, but it's not going to change. In fact, the oath of loyalty isn't even expected from immigrants anymore. So I mean, where the hell's it all gone wrong? Is what I'm saying, Doctor.
Well, yeah, and one other point that's really changed is technology, right? You can call home, you can visit home, you can listen to your hometown radio station on the Internet, all with dramatically greater ease than 100 years ago. And as a consequence, that too hinders assimilation. So the logical thing, I think most people who look at this fairly with the interests of the United States in mind, would suggest that a more moderate pace of immigration would make sense. On illegal immigration, you have to obviously control your border, but there's lots of other things. You have to go after the employers who hire the illegals. We could do that. You have to make sure you get the cooperation of state and local law enforcement. You have to make sure that you don't give all kinds of benefits to illegal immigrants, driver's license, in-state college tuition,
and so forth. Now, hold on, Doctor. What is going to be their motivation to vote for the Democratic Party if you don't give them all those free things?
Well,
I think you're losing sight of the agenda.
But I do think that if the Republican Party were to make the case, and I think this is what's sort of happening with Trump, but in a more clear way, that, look, the reason that we want to control immigration, have less legal immigration, and reduce illegal immigration as well, is to help American workers, to take some of the pressure off of schools, to help American taxpayers, to facilitate the integration and assimilation of immigrants. I think most Americans would agree with that. It's just,
most
even
Americans
Trump is unable to sort of articulate that argument, and so he touches on it, and it really resonates with people. If he were to really push it, I think he would do great.
I think that if he fleshes that idea out, I agree with you, Doctor. We're on the line with Dr. Stephen Camerata, who serves as the Director of Research for the Center for Immigration Studies in D.C. I think you're right. What about this notion? We don't have a lot of time left, but what about this notion of anchor babies? Is Donald Trump reading it right? Is he reading it wrong? Can it be eliminated? Why is it that ambassadors come here and their wives have children and they don't become American citizens, but if you come across the Rio Grande, somehow you're naturally a citizen? It's a little confusing to people like me.
Yeah, well, even the ambassadors, there's clear evidence that even that aspect of it isn't enforced anymore. So that what happens is it runs, so that your listeners understand, there's never been a court ruling, there's no legislation saying that the children of illegal immigrants are citizens, but it runs on autopilot. If you send in your birth certificate and a photo, the State Department gives you a passport. passport. In effect, the State Department just gave you citizenship. If you go down to the voter registration and assert that you're a citizen and show them a birth certificate from the United States, they register you to vote.
Last question.
The local
Last question
registrar of voters has just conferred citizenship. In other words, there's no conscious decision. It just runs on autopilot. You could have Congress pass a law saying that they're not U.S. citizens, or anyone born after a certain date is not.
Right.
But it would end up in the courts, and you'd have to change the way you registered birth. Namely,
but does that happen anywhere else?
Parents showed, provided Social Security numbers and date of birth and so forth.
Right, but does that happen, Doctor? Does that happen anywhere else? Does it happen anywhere else in the world?
Most countries have moved away for it. There are a few left. Most of the European countries and most of the world don't do it. We're one of the few.
And that's what I thought. I've had this argument with liberals saying everybody does that. I'm like, no, they do not. Dr. Camerata, what a pleasure. What a great conversation. Thank you so much.
The Steve Gruber Show, American Values with Midwestern Common Sense.
All righty, it's 45 after the hour on this Wednesday. How long have we been talking about roads in this state and doing something about it? I mean, seriously, how long? 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? A long time, apparently. Going all the way back to the Engler administration. Going all the way, we did all these infrastructure deals that we're still paying for, and yet our roads continue to deteriorate. And so far, Lansing hasn't produced anything, but our next guest said we could finally be on the way. Nolan Finley is the Detroit News editor and columnist joining us on the program. Nolan, welcome back.
Morning, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing well. You say you write that there's something starting to take shape in Lansing. Can you give us an idea of what you're finding?
Yeah, I mean, they seem to have both Democrat and Republican votes on board for a deal that would raise $1.2 million, $800 in new revenue, and $400 in reprioritized spending out of the general fund, and they're committed to a clean bill. I don't know if it's going to happen this week. I think it'll probably be introduced this week, but I think it'll take them a while to come together. But I just heard Brian Calley say that he's as optimistic as he's ever been, and they're as close as they've been. So I think we're headed in the right direction, at least. Well,
okay, now headed in the right direction. Now let me see what that. How does that shape up? What's it going to cost me? What's it going to cost you? And obviously, we're gonna feel it somewhere, aren't we?
Yeah, what they're talking about right now is a 9-cent increase in the gasoline tax, about a $50 increase average in the vehicle registration fee, higher truck fees and fines on heavy trucks, and assorted other things like that to get to the $800 million in new revenue.
Yeah, so fees, fines, vehicle registration, gas tax. I guess my question is this, Nolan, you've watched this for an awfully long time, as have I. Do you feel confident that if a deal like this finally takes shape, that it'll actually work this time, as opposed to piling up debt for the future, as we saw happen with 3 programs, like I said, dating all the way back to the Engler administration? Those programs are coming on, and we're still paying for them, and we certainly hope not to see that again.
I hope so. I mean, I hope it'll provide a steady flow of real cash to fix the roads. There's no question these roads and bridges are abysmal. They're not going to fix themselves. I don't like taxes any more than anyone else, but
yeah.
I think this is the best way to do it. And I also believe that with gas prices headed in the direction they're headed in, I believe that's a long-term trend, particularly with the new oil that's going to be coming on the market from Iran. You've got the glut in the U.S. I think it's the most responsible and rational way to raise money for roads.
I believe you're right about the price of gasoline being a long-term trend down. I guess my question would be, these taxes and fees and so forth, and I don't like them any more than you do. and we'll talk about the gas tax in particular. Wouldn't it be more appropriate if it were a temporary gas tax that was then later scaled back? Shouldn't that be the goal, or to find some way to retire Michigan's 170, depends on who you ask, 150, 160, 170 billion dollars in debt in a state where we only have a $55 billion budget, give or take, and we're triple that in our liabilities. Somehow, at some point, we have to address those concerns as well.
Well, to the first question, I don't think the road problem is temporary. I think it's going to take a long time to get these roads the way they should be. We've neglected them for a long time. For whatever reason, we got the worst roads in the Midwest for sure, maybe the nation. And it's just beating our vehicles to death, and it's making us less competitive. So I don't think the problem's a short-term problem. The one issue you have with the gas tax is each year the trend is that it produces less revenue because of fuel efficiency and people driving fewer miles, etc. I think that's why they added the registration fee increase to give it a little more stability and account for the fact that gasoline taxes don't produce the revenue they used to. You see that on the federal level as well, where the National Highway Trust Fund is running out of money or has run out of money. We're not getting much help from Washington.
No, in a variety of places. So I guess give me an idea what you think the time frame may be as you see this thing starting to gel a little bit. What do you think the time frame is for something coming out and possibly being put into place?
Well, Tim Greimel had said he would expect it to be about a month. So a month before they pass the bill. I imagine it would kick into effect sometime later this fall.
All right. Well, Nolan Finley, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. Have a good day.
There you have it, everybody. Nolan Finley, the editor of the Detroit News op-ed page and a columnist for the Detroit News. And maybe we are finally starting to head towards a plan. I'm not going to call it a solution. I'm not going to call it we'll see what it looks like and see how much money we get stuck with, because I'm going to guess that, the bill's coming and we're going to get stuck with it. And many folks are not going to be happy with it because more taxes seems to be the answer every time. And it seems to come from both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats alike. And I know there are plenty of the listeners out there, might include you, that don't care for more taxes and more fees. Sure, gasoline's coming down. And gasoline could be below $2 a gallon for all of us in Michigan. It's below $2 at several places, but it could be below $2 for a lot of folks. And wouldn't we like to keep it there? But it seems that the knee-jerk reaction is to gas is down, so let's go see if we can raise some money elsewhere, right? It just seems to be that way. Seems to be by my understanding of it. Anyhow, the average price for a gallon of gas right now is $2.32 around the state. Lambertville has $1.93, Dearborn $1.96, Plainwell $1.96, and Otsego at $1.97. So good prices all over the state, well under $2. It's the Steve Gruber Show on a Wednesday. We'll be right back.